Welcome, everyone, to this webinar co-sponsored by the O'Neill Lancet Commission on Racism, Structural Discrimination, and Global Health, and EqualHealth's Global Campaign Against Racism. We are going to be talking about a global fight against a global problem and looking in detail at EqualHealth's local global campaign against racism. But before I get started, let me just say we have simultaneous translation available in 4 languages, so English, Spanish, Haitian Creole, and Portuguese. And we are happy to have as our Haitian Creole translators Clément and Christelle. We are happy to have as our Portuguese translators, Alex and Raquel. We're happy to have as our Spanish interpreters, Grace and Halil. So they'll be going basically those languages to English and back. Also, about the O'Neill Lancet Commission on Racism, Structural Discrimination, and Global Health, that's a 3-year commission. We are in the 2nd year. I am one of the commissioners. The commission is being led by Dr. Tlaleng Mofokeng, who is the UN Special Rapporteur on the Right to Health, and Dr. Ngozi Irondu, who is with she is actually a senior scholar with the O'Neill Institute at Georgetown Law, as well as a technical director on the Global Institute for Disease Elimination. The reason that we're having this, and the commission, I'll say, it's 3 years, we're just past our 1st year, 20 commissioners from many parts of the world, but of course there are 195 countries, plus others that that aren't fully members of the United Nations. So our members aren't from all of the countries around the world, but we try to at least have some good reach. And this is part of our effort to learn from and identify practices that are not just in the global health space. I mean, we have the World Health Organization and all of those organizations. Things that are not just in the racism space. There's, an anti-racism treaty, the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, and there's the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. But in recognition that these things are very much connected, and they're very much connected not only at global institutional levels, but on the ground and in the bodies of actual people. So today we're going to be learning from EqualHealth's Global Campaign Against Racism, which is has been sustained for 6 years so far. There are 15 chapters across 9 countries. And as we talk with, I'm going to list our speakers because we're going to be in conversation. So each one will introduce themselves the first time they speak, but in alphabetical order. There's Sohaib Abaza, who is a representative of the Atlanta chapter of CAR. Anne-Marie Collins, who is one of the 2 global organizers, and she is located in Spain. Tinashe Goronga, who is the other of the 2 global organizers, and he's located in Zimbabwe. Alex, Marie Alexandra Michel, or Alex, who is a member of the Haiti chapter. Michelle Morse, who is a co-founder of Equal Health that launched CAR. And Elena Terran, or Nare, who is with the Barcelona chapter. And I am Kamara Jones. I'm one of the commissioners on the commission. And my role is going to be to listen, to learn, and then to ask questions. I will also say, in addition to letting you know about the simultaneous translation, to access it, you go at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and you'll be able to pick your language. So do that now. So if your language is English, if you want to hear English translation, no matter who's speaking, then pick English or Creole or Portuguese or Spanish. When any of us is speaking, we're going to speak more slowly than usual. And you hear that I've caught myself several times, and that's in service of the translation. And even this language justice aspect of having 4 languages available in this meeting is characteristic of CAR. So I will pass it on now to Dr. Michelle Morse to get us started.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Thank you, Dr. Jones. It's great to be together today across many, many time zones and many languages, many continents, many cultures. It's a real honor for us to share a little bit about the history of the global campaign against racism and how we've partnered over the past 6 years, almost 7 years at this point. I will just say very briefly, I am an internal medicine and public health doctor. I've spent the past 15 years or so doing global health equity work, living and working in Haiti and Rwanda and Botswana and several other places. I'm originally from Philadelphia and currently based in New York City in the New York City Health Department. I have learned so much from the people who are on this webinar today. So I hope that the dialogue and learning and conversation will be really vibrant and active and engaging. And I'm just kicking it off with a little bit of the context and history of how this campaign came together. And then I'm going to pass it off to Dr. Tinashe Garanga, who's going to share a bit more about the evolution of the campaign, as well as the other folks on the call, Anne-Marie, Suhaib, Elena, and others. So with that, I'll be brief. And again, I think the ask is to get your questions ready. Is that right? And we want to make sure that there is space for dialogue more towards the end.
Yes, in fact, you'll notice at the bottom of your Zoom thing that you can put in questions at any time in the Q&A. And so because this is not presenter, but this is a conversation, we encourage questions all along the way. Questions can be theoretical, they can be practical, they can any kind of question, because we learn from each other. So back to you, Michelle.
Thanks, Dr. Jones. Okay, great. So with that, we were asked to talk a little about what inspired the creation of the global campaign against racism and the movement that we've been involved in and a part of. And I wanted to start with what feels like many years ago, but is really in the grand scheme of this movement for global social justice and health equity is really just very recent in many ways. EqualHealth was founded in 2010 after the earthquake in Haiti. And since 2010 and 2012, we've partnered with colleagues in Uganda, Haiti, Minnesota, and many other places to run social medicine courses. And what is social medicine? Well, social medicine is essentially a field of work and a discipline and a study that says that health and healthcare are not just about clinics and hospitals, that in fact, who is healthy and who's not healthy is much more determined by political decisions, policies, society, structures, et cetera. And that because of that, those of us who are engaged in changing the status quo, which is profound global health inequity, we have to engage at all levels, and especially at a social and structural level, to change the context in which our communities find health and achieve health and actually have the right to health. So with that in mind, these courses in social medicine were very much about how do we engage the next generation of health workers and support them both in building relationships with each other and solidarity, but also in building a movement that will completely disrupt the current inequitable, unfair status quo in global health inequity. And with that in mind, the courses in Uganda started in 2010 and in Haiti in 2012. And these are 3 to 4 week immersion courses really focused on not just the theory of politics and structure and economics and neoliberalism and colonialism, but also the specific examples of how that history, choices, policies, et cetera, plays out in a place like Gulu, Uganda, in northern Uganda, that experienced an extensive, long time civil war, or in Haiti, where in 1804, Haiti became the first ever independent Black republic and successful revolution of enslaved people, and yet has been punished by the world for the past 200 years because of that success, and has some of the worst health outcomes in the Western Hemisphere because of that systemic oppression after that victory. So with that in mind, we look at those local examples, and we also looked at how do we teach community organizing and movement building as a part of those courses. Well, you can imagine the graduates of the courses went back to their contexts and were even more frustrated with what they were seeing, because they have this analysis, this new set of language and tools and references and learning and relationships and friends, and wanted to see even more change, were even more angry with the status quo. And I'm happy to say that those graduates really came together in the years following the launches of the course to say we need a platform where we can keep learning together, keep organizing together, and keep pushing for profound change. And so that's how the Social Medicine Consortium came about, as well as organizations like Social Medicine Alumni Haiti, a Haitian-led, Haitian-based organization of alumni of the social medicine course in Haiti, to really say, we are not going to have this. This is not the kind of society and structure that allows us to ensure health and human rights in our communities. And so we need to keep organizing together. And so at the time, in around 2015 and 2016, we started formally meeting as the Social Medicine Consortium, initially in Chicago, then in Minneapolis. And at that point, there were hundreds of alumni of the Uganda and Haiti courses who were both international as well as from those two countries. And together, we really started to build what I would say is an organizing platform for social change. So that brings us to 2016, and many of you who are based in the United States may remember the summer of 2016 in particular, when Philando Castile and Alton Sterling both were murdered within just a few days of each other. And there was an even larger demand and growth and expansion of the Black Lives Matter movement in many ways. That event was an unforgettable, I would say, turning point in the trajectory of some of our work. And not long after, in 2017, we had our second annual social medicine conference in Chicago, where Dr. Jones was the keynote speaker. And that led to a number of really powerful conversations, including an invitation to collaborate around a global aspect of the campaign against racism that Dr. Jones was calling for as president of the American Public Health Association. And in some ways, the rest was history. I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Garunga in just a moment. But we did feel very strongly that before we could develop and launch this global campaign against racism, we really needed the input of the health workers and organizers that we had already been partnering with. And so we spent a whole year really doing engagement and planning before deciding to go ahead and launch this campaign. And that year included focus groups, with about 10 focus groups with students and organizers from, I want to say, 7 or 8 countries that we were already engaging in through the Social Medicine Consortium. I will never forget the conversation with the Haiti team in particular, where we started the conversation talking about different frameworks for structural racism, the different levels of racism, and initially thinking, well, we're not sure if this is really a relevant framework for us. And then very quickly, we got into the examples of colorism, of skin bleaching, of the fact that most of the people who own property and businesses in Haiti are light skinned, and many of them have roots in immigrants in the 1800s, actually from the Middle East, and that the power structure actually in Haiti, even though it's a Black country, still has deep, deep levels of both structural and internalized racism and everything in between. And so those were the kinds of conversations that we needed to have before we could really figure out what our engagement would look like and what kind of container we would build for this global campaign. And I'll just say, once we launched in the spring of 2018, in Red Rock, New Mexico, we had already learned a ton, but I would say our learning and action has just deepened by bounds and accelerated and completely transformed our whole organization, quite frankly, over the past 6 years since we started the campaign. So that's just that's perhaps a slightly long-winded history about kind of where the roots of this work, at least for us, come from. And I'll pass it over to Dr. Goronga to take the baton and share a little more about the evolution of the campaign.
All right. Thank you so much, Michelle. So my name is Tinashe Goronga, and I'm a medical doctor and public health specialist from Zimbabwe, and I'm one of the organizers, as mentioned. And it's been 9 years now since I first met Michelle. So I met Michelle in 2015 in Uganda, Gulu. I'm one of the social medicine alumni, so I did the course in 2015. And I was interested. It made me like have a better understanding of some of the of social determination of health and structural determination of health just beyond the biological basis. So that's how. So I was motivated to continue being plugged in the work. So I attended the first social medicine conference in Minnesota in 2016, and I'm also uh, one of the many alumni who are agitating for being able to apply some of the concept that we were learning, because we're going back to our systems and getting frustrated by seeing so much inequities and feeling helpless and hopeless. And we really needed that drive to make a change. So in 2017, when Dr. Camara Jones was the main speaker for the conference, she talked about the different levels of racism. So I come from a country that was a settler colony until 1980. And often when we think about the racial dynamics of the country, most people just end at 1980 and they do not think about the legacies of colonialism. So like my other colleagues from Uganda and Haiti were trying to figure out if this was relevant to our context. But as Dr. Kamara Jones broke down the different levels of racism, we started realizing that, well, most of us were focusing on interpersonal racism because that's what's commonly seen, but we're not looking at the structural part, which is the invisible force. So I'll give an example of why, like my personal reflection that made me so much interested in becoming part of the campaign. I grew up in a city where there was only one school that offers advanced level. So if people understand the British school system, advanced level is what you need to go to university. But so it meant that in the entire city, only a few number of students who made it to that school are the only ones who could make it to who could make it to university. But I never sort of analyzed why that was the case, why we had only one school. But when you do a root cause analysis, you actually notice that it was that school before independence, it was a whites only school. And after independence, it was in a high income residential area. So it meant only people from high income neighborhoods could go. So you could see that the legacies of colonialism were persisting and continuing in terms of the structures that we didn't realize that were still affecting who has access to quality education and opportunities. So that understanding of how structural racism and the legacies of colonialism continued really made me want to be part of the campaign. So I was involved in some of the early focus groups with our colleagues from different parts of the world. And it was really mind-blowing seeing the similarities when we described the different circumstances that we faced without. I remember there's a time when we were asked where they put a definition of structural racism without putting the name structural racism or white supremacy. And we could relate to that. And I think that was one of the starting points to see some of the common. So we were thinking about how can we have a global campaign considering some of the similar historical context and also the differences in historical context. So even in Africa, you notice some were settler colonies and some were not. And in different parts of the world right now, in terms of the interactions and structural racism, the different historical components determine our view. So that's when the idea of having a chapter-based model came up. So it's to center the local context and then have the global connections in our work. So when the campaign against racism was eventually launched, it was launched on the using that chapter model, with which presented opportunities to learn from different contexts, to learn about the history of different contexts, to learn about the challenges in different contexts. And I remember thinking that initially I didn't imagine the campaign of against racism to go for this period. I thought it was going to be a short-term project, but over time as we continued to learn from each other, we started noticing. So I'll give a specific example. So when we started, most of our frameworks were influenced by the Marshall-Ganz model, and our focus was a lot more on US-based frameworks. But over time, with the chapters learning from different contexts and having different movements coming up with political education, we started realizing some of the systems within the campaign that we needed to do. So one of the things that we noticed that every time we were centering like English speaking people, which led to the need for language justice. And when language justice came in, it allowed us to start learning from other colleagues from Haiti, from Brazil and others, because we now could communicate amongst us, and which I think was very important. I wish something that could be extended to the rest of the world, because if you look at how our world is structured at the moment, we are still very Anglo-centric, and our education systems and our art systems. And when you also continued the deeper analysis, we also started seeing like in terms of some of the structural issues that we like debt and some of the that are responsible for some of the global dynamics. So these were some of the global connections that we were making. As much as we were emphasizing on the local context, we're also learning from the global context. And I think my colleague will build more on that in Marie in terms of some of the continued lessons. But I think what I can say before I hand it over to Henry is, for me, it has been an interesting journey of learning and unlearning and rethinking how we do things. I was brought up in I was educated in a biomedical system, hierarchical system, and I had to learn to have a decolonized lens of approaching things. So things like distributive leadership, where we're trying to actively avoid a hierarchical system, were very helpful to me in terms of in my trajectory of understanding this. And and that's deeper analysis in terms of the structural systems continues, as I'm learning more now from work being done by South feminists, like global South feminist movements, healing justice movements. And I would say normally I've been interacting with the topics in academic setting, but I think as we moved from centering health professional voices to really learning from communities, I've learned a lot from such movements and activism that are doing similar or related work around the globe. I'll pass it on to Anne-Marie. Thank you.
And Anne-Marie, before you start, I realize that we don't know. So in your remarks, you can also address, we don't know what the 9 countries are now that have chapters, 15 chapters. We don't know how many other chapters have come and gone. We don't know about the stability or the growth of this, as well as you started, Dr. Goronga Tinashe, to talk about some of the lessons learned even in how you do this movement building of language, justice, distributed leadership. So even to pick up on some more of the, as things have evolved, some more of the lessons learned. And all of us need to remember to speak slowly. Okay.
All right, thank you so much. And it's such an honor to be in this space. And I'm just so grateful for this space also always to reflect on our journey. What a journey. So my name is Anne-Marie. I'm from Glasgow originally. I'm a community organizer in Spain. And I just feel really, from growing up in Glasgow with such drastic inequities in health, I've always organized against at the intersection of popular education and public health. And I came on to the campaign very much at the beginning, within 6 months. And I'm very much going to speak to the movement building component. And yeah, I welcome like questions and reflections also on that. I mean, I think Tinashe covered a lot around the part of raising consciousness across 15 contexts now that we're in on racial capitalism and on structural racism. And I think that is, I mean, I just want to emphasize that is still the most, you know, enriching part of this campaign to dismantle structural racism. It's always emerging. I think that we had an interesting discussion in planning this webinar where one of the questions was around, you know, this, I guess, this one model of structural racism, you know, and what is our model? And I think that we feel the opposite, right? Like we have learned that there's not one model, and it's more around like giving space to the various approaches, to the various methodologies, you know, from Indigenous communities to the Global South, to the decolonialized feminism work that we do, and how do we bring that those methodologies then into building power and struggling forward for our causes. And I wanted to also address the part around, you know, we had this very interesting shift where we initially started to look at structural racism. We are so grateful still by the frameworks of the Gardener's Tale from Dr. Jones that really rooted us in those questions around how is racism operating, what is our strategy to respond to structural racism in our communities. But I think also part of the emerging, you know, lessons learned in those frameworks is when we went to Chiapas and we visited Indigenous communities and we visited the Zapatistas and we engaged in dialogues, we started to get deeper around the economic systems that are upholding structural racism. And that's why we do speak now to structural, to racial capitalism as well, where we really want to think about, I guess, the extraction part also of structural racism and you know, the whole economy-based part benefits really of this hierarchy and of white supremacist ideology. And then another part is on the raising consciousness is I guess we see ourselves through 2 lenses in the campaign, I would say always. One is political education, and then the other is always community organizing. So we've spoken a lot around that global dialogue that we are always having, and I just emphasize that we're always in struggle around the concepts of structural racism, of racial capitalism. More recently, we've brought in the frameworks of settler colonialism, where we learned a lot recently in New Mexico around the impacts of uranium. also in those communities and their health outcomes. And so to the movement building part, and shifting right to the other lens, I think it's important to say, right, that like we really learned a lot from our teachers in the campaign on movement building, and there are two frameworks since COVID, in particular, that I think made us more courageous in our actions. Tinashe spoke to one framework, which was language justice, which it wasn't about only allowing, obviously, that decolonializing of us from the inside to the outside, but I think it was also about, you know, that power that all those contexts brought to us on the global actions, right? Like from Haiti to Brazil. And then I think the other framework that's been fundamental since the offset of the pandemic has been healing justice. And I really want to lift up the Kindred Collective and Cara Page in particular, who it's just been such an honor to work in those spaces and collaborate with them. And I think for us, in terms of movement building, we very much came in with the typical questions of movement building, building power, who are our people, the strategy from the local to the global. And we never ever reflected on generational trauma. You know, we are across context at all various intersections of systems of oppression. And it's not only about the generational trauma, right, that is going through the lineage of the campaign, but it's also about how is that showing up in our spaces? How is that affecting our struggles? So I think that was just as pivotal as the language justice framework. And then I think the other lessons learned from COVID, which, you know, I'm mentioning COVID, I think it's obvious for all of us here, but just to name, right, it was the mask that came off and really allowed us this space to finally normalize, you know, mainstream dialogue on structures of oppression and then health outcomes. And I think the other part of COVID, which, you know, allowed us to be more courageous, was when we're organizing across such contexts, like we have to pay attention to material conditions, and we have to understand that care is a political organizing strategy. And I think that that's also something that in the way that we are, you know, moving now, we're trying to think a lot about it. This is not a situation of like, we bring in a chapter, we do an action with them, we look for some money for grants. This is about the constant restructuring of our power as we organize, right? And one example with Naret, who's in this space, we organize locally with an anti-racism network here in Spain. And one action would be that we're doing recently for undocumented people, particularly women and girls, is we're kind of getting everyone together in the house that has a fixed address, and we're registering undocumented migrant people so they can have access to health, so they can have access to the social services. Like, rather than waiting on that dependency of the institutions saying at what hierarchy they get to be in, at what point they get to get access, we're shifting that, and we're giving this address so they're no longer, you know, undocumented in the eyes of, I guess, their basic human rights. And then we're pushing forward together as a community to struggle, you know, for their access to their services. And I think that's a way that we're changing this shift around like marginalized communities, grant money. No, we can do mutual aid within ourselves all the time. Like every time we're having a call with Haiti, who can take notes, who can be connected to the internet more, etc., etc. So I want to also bring that up, the lessons learned around material conditions and paying attention. And then regarding expansion and I'll end, I mean, expansion very much is emerging. I think just now we're very much in this moment, which I think Suai will speak much better to, around settler colonialism, around us thinking about the social determinants, no longer of health, but settler colonialism, right? How that is a very distinct system of oppression from the, you know, mass displacement to the health outcomes that, you know, result are as a result of settler colonialism, and they are not, you know, a result of those communities and lifting up Bran Whistleaway, whose frameworks have really helped us think that out. And again, you know, that as we emerge into settler colonialism and raise our consciousness on that and start to, you know, struggle on that, inevitably chapters more come towards us. So just now we're activating, we hope, a chapter in the Western Sahara that's still under the struggles of Moroccan occupation. And in that way, I'm trying to show that the expansion is more with the emergences of our own consciousness. When people start to feel that this is now the space for them, given the expansion of those methodologies. And I will pass it to our chapters, because I think this is the most exciting part, that we really hear this like live in the weeds experience. But if I missed anything, Dr. Jones, please let me know.
Well, it's exactly right to move to the chapters now, but I want to pick up a question that's already come in from the chat, which is to the chapters, really. How does CAR go about uniting the distinct local manifestations of structural racism at the global level? That is, how does the chapter experience and the work, how does that get united? So as the chapter representatives speak, maybe you can have that in the back of your mind. And then the second part of this question is this kind of overarching lexicon on structural racism meaningful to pursue? So I don't know if that means, do we need one kind of language or one kind of frame? And you both have said the education has been in the multiple manifestations of structural racism in different contexts, but it would be useful since that question came in from the audience, to think about that as the chapters now speak. So to whom are you passing it, Anne-Marie?
Yeah, I'll pass it to Suaib first. I think the interconnection is there, and then we can go from that.
Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you. I'm Suhaib. I'm currently a senior resident in a level 1 trauma center here in an urban public hospital in Atlanta, Georgia, finishing a training in emergency medicine. I'm a hardline harm reductionist, working to serve unsheltered folks, sex workers, the formerly incarcerated. These are the populations that have motivated me to seek a career in emergency medicine, as these populations regularly fall through the cracks of an unfair health system, resulting in seeking care with emergency services, ambulances, the emergency department, etc. I hope I'm able to speak slowly enough here for interpreters to provide adequate interpretation, by the way, and please let me know if I should go any slower. My work with the campaign against racism has been ongoing for the past 7+ years now. I am a student, first and foremost, of Dr. Kamara Jones, a student of Dr. Michelle Morse, and a student from, of all the chapters and international collaboration in the campaign against racism, including the individuals on this call. I consider the campaign against racism my organizing home base. This has been my political education and has helped to form me and sharpen my analysis to become, hopefully, the type of physician that I hope to be in the future. The work that we do in our Atlanta chapter, I'm excited to share with you all, actually started at that meeting establishing the chapter model for the campaign against racism in Las Cruces, New Mexico in 2017. During that meeting, individuals from the Southeast region, particularly in Georgia, came together to apply a global model that we were given from Dr. Jones and others to address structural inequity and apply that to our local context. And so through the framework of community organizing, the immediate next step for us was to plug in to those moving work on the ground, on the grassroots level here in Atlanta. And so the movements that we took the leadership of were those working to stop the expansion of incarceration in our city, which experiences per capita one of the largest, specifically in the South. Our first target was the Atlanta City Detention Center. There was a massive movement, and still continues to be a massive movement here in Atlanta, to transform the Atlanta City Detention Center into a center for diversion and equity. This is bred from the origins of the Atlanta City Detention Center, which was built in anticipation of the 1996 Olympics that would be held in Georgia, in Atlanta, to help, quote, clean up the city. In effect, it was the prioritization of the aesthetic of the city to international and folks coming to see the Olympics from all over. And in effect, ended up in the large-scale incarceration of unsheltered folks, poor black and brown folks. And so we saw it only appropriate to address this by transforming that detention center into a center that could help wrap around those individuals. Currently, that is underway, but a very incremental process. But as healthcare workers, we saw our role as expanding the capacity of the grassroots organizations that were already doing that work. The way we did that was by establishing something called the Prison Praxis Series. And so this was a group of grassroots organizers, medical students, healthcare professionals, legal advocates, and lawyers, and more specifically and most importantly, formerly incarcerated and currently incarcerated individuals. The point of the Prison Praxis Series was to bring folks from the community to the jails and prisons, whether they were ICE detention centers for undocumented immigrants, or just the women's jail here in Atlanta, which largely incarcerates Black women, mostly from poor backgrounds. And so through those visits, what we hoped to do was actually build networks of solidarity and action that could work to report on and increase the awareness of healthcare practitioners and other community members as to the lived realities of incarcerated and formerly incarcerated individuals. And so what ensued was actually, to help answer your question, or the question you brought up, Dr. Jones, I wanted to kind of bring up how a global model within the Campaign Against Racism helped us manifest a very locally specific initiative. And that initiative was the formerly incarcerated Transitions Clinic. So the FID Clinic is basically an endeavor, a multi-specialty service and clinic, which helps to wrap around the individuals who were formerly justice impacted. This was bred from the CHW, or community health worker model, that I saw from the Palestine chapter and the Haiti chapter already being done to wrap around individuals who were impacted by structural violence and structural inequity. And so what I saw in the Palestine chapter is community health workers visiting, Palestinian aunties who are in largely concentrated refugee camps, who are having difficulty obtaining even the most basic primary care. And these community health workers, some of whom were formerly incarcerated, were providing blood sugar, blood pressure measurements, taking folks to their foot appointment, podiatry appointments for diabetes, helping to refill medicines and provide education. And so we learned from that model and attempted to bring it to Atlanta in the form of a formerly incarcerated transitions clinic. And so this clinic we're in the process actually now of doing the community surveying necessary in order to actually make the FID clinic a reality. But what we hope to have is potentially formerly justice impacted individuals who are able to reach out to others who recently left detention and help to wrap around their care. As you can imagine, if you just left jail specifically here in Atlanta or prison, you basically get $20, a bus card, and the same clothes that you were incarcerated in. And so, as you can imagine, trying to get your life together after that, refilling your psych meds or your diabetes medicines or seeing a primary care physician is one of the very last things you're probably thinking of doing. And so that's what our intent was, to bring care to those individuals, and to actually facilitate their journey to health. And so that's maybe a more specific instance of how we used our global framework to help make an initiative on the local level, while also staying rooted in community work. So that's a little bit about the Atlanta chapter. I did want to bring up kind of how the past few years have changed that work very briefly. We take our direction from the masses and the working people of our city, those working for justice, those working for equity, those working against racism in all its forms. In the past few years, let's start in COVID-19, what we've seen is an absolute explosion of mutual aid and grassroots organizing. And as the Campaign Against Racism Atlanta chapter, we saw our role as following their lead. So in the height of COVID-19, we were helping to support mutual aid hubs. These would be 24-hour hubs in neighborhoods that could provide PPE, could serve as a resource center, but we're also doing education in their own communities. We were supporting harm reductionist efforts to provide PPE to unsheltered folks, but also provide food, provide contraceptive to sex workers, and provide testing on the streets for HIV and hepatitis for those who are seeking that. This ended up looking realistically like our houses being filled with boxes of condoms and Plan B and masks, but that was just what a harm reductionist house looks like. And so that was COVID-19. We saw that COVID-19 and the mutual aid efforts were then further accelerated by the death of George Floyd, or the murder of George Floyd, which caused a massive rise in participation in the Black Lives Matter movement. We are a global coalition, the Campaign Against Racism, but I think that on a very local level, what we found ourselves doing was supporting that movement by organizing healthcare workers who protested in the hundreds for equity and the end to racial violence in our communities. And I think that was a call that folks around the globe also participated in. More recently, you may have heard about Cop City, or the movement to stop Cop City. As the Campaign Against Racism Atlanta chapter, we found ourselves deeply entrenched in that movement. And just to bring a global lens to it, the Stop Cop City movement is an effort to redirect the funding that would be used to build a police training facility that's about 300 football fields size, in order for law enforcement to increase their investment in violence and violent solutions to issues in our community, which actually require care and are scientifically proven to improve with wraparound services, with careful attention to gaps in healthcare, housing, employment, rather than cuffs and cages. As we learned from the '96 Olympics, cages and cuffs don't disappear problems, they only make them worse. And so more recently, we've been working to organize healthcare workers to speak out to help end the expansion of the Cop City movement, working to support the forest defenders, those who are engaging in resistance to the building of the Cop City facility. And you may have heard of the death of one such forest defender, Tortuguita, who was murdered by police totally unarmed in an act of nonviolent protest in the forest, trying to stop the building of this cop city. Again, we meet global connections here. This same cop city facility is surely to be utilized as part of the Georgia International Law Enforcement Exchange. One such law enforcement exchange, as there are many across the United States, to expand collaboration with the Israeli military, which we are seeing currently enact a wholesale genocide and collective punishment on a besieged population. And we'll get into the struggle in Palestine maybe later in this conversation. But we see our fight against Cop City as in part bringing an end to this deadly exchange, which brings those same occupation style apartheid police tactics here to the US, surely to be enacted on the poor brown and black folks who already suffer at the hands of state violence. So that's a little bit about how our chapter has worked across other chapters to find local action and find a place for ourselves as largely healthcare practitioners and health students in that movement. So thank you all so much for allowing me this space to reflect. Let's see, should I pass it on? Who should I pass it on to next? Help me out here, Anne-Marie.
Well, before that, as you pass it on, I'll tell you that it is 53 after the hour. We have until 30 minutes after the next hour, but we want to have even more conversation. So we really appreciate everything that everybody said, and just be aware that we want to also reserve some time. The other questions, as the other two chapter reps speak, in addition to what you came to say, if there are any challenges, to talk about challenges that you faced. And then before we close, I want us to also lift up how the chapters not only do local work and learn from global themes, but what are the cross-cutting themes that have emerged that bind the chapters at a different level? And also just the practicality, how often do chapters meet? How often do the chapter reps meet and all that? Because people might be listening to this and really appreciate the power and the sustainability of this model and want to have more detail. So now, Anne-Marie, you please suggest the next person to speak.
Yeah, maybe Nare. That would be perfect, Nare.
Nared, did you hear? It's you.
Ahora sí, no escuchaba, lo siento mucho. Hola a todos, estoy muy agradecida de estar aquí en este espacio, aprendiendo, escuchando. Creo que para responder un poco, ¿no?, esa pregunta sobre cómo apoya la campaña global al trabajo local. Yo estoy en Cataluña, en Barcelona, y creo que descubrir que no es una casualidad y que estamos bajo un orden colonialista, extractivista, ¿no?, que penetra en las mentes y en las cuerpos literalmente, y que protege, ¿no?, a unos cuantos y que desampara a muchas otras, y que no solo te está pasando a ti, sino que a muchas comunidades. Esto es muy desesperanzador, pero porque también uno cree que ese orden establecido, ¿no?, es inquebrantable. Entonces siento que es cuando necesito recursos para llenarnos aquí, ¿no?, en Barcelona, la gente, comunidades racializadas, a las personas negras, de llenarnos de coraje. Y yo específicamente uso los recuerdos y la memoria como un recurso, ¿no?, como un arma política y social para luchar contra esa estructura. Yo Vengo de una ciudad históricamente negra, de Cartagena de Indias, en Colombia, y tengo muchos recuerdos de cómo en mi vida y la de los míos no existían perspectivas de futuro. Y cuando hablo de esas perspectivas de futuro, hablo de la vida en sí misma, ¿no? Del vivir con posibilidades de vida digna, en sintonía de un todo y unas condiciones materiales que la posibiliten. Pero a pesar de ello, había un fuerte sentimiento en mi comunidad de arraigo, ¿no? Con el territorio. Entonces, ese sentimiento de comunidad lo rescatas y lo traes, sí, lo traes a tu vida. Cuando luego cuando luego te encuentras en un contexto migratorio y apareces aquí en Cataluña, como es mi realidad ahora, y desde donde hablo, mi lugar de enunciación, ¿no? Y veo junto a otras personas, me veo junto a otras personas luchando por posibilidades, por oportunidades, y siento que CAR definitivamente multiplicó para nosotras esa posibilidad de lucha colectiva y por ende de hacer comunidad, de arraigarse globalmente para evidenciar lo que viví en mi niñez, pero que también vivo ahora en mi vida adulta en dos contextos diferentes. Por un lado Cartagena, por otro lado España, ¿no? Pero que no es casualidad y que de esa manera en la que opera el racismo aquí y ahora está obviamente conectada con la manera en que opera en Cartagena hoy y al mismo tiempo en Barcelona. Y cuando realmente veo como las dinámicas de trabajo de CAR, los procesos y me veo involucrada en todo ello, pienso y lo conecto mucho con mi historia y con la historia ancestral de la Colombia afro, ¿no? De la Colombia negra. Y pienso en la historia de las personas arrocheladas, ¿no? Que fueron personas que vivían aisladas, huyendo de la opresión y que se juntaban en la clandestinidad para sobrevivir, pero también para compartir estrategias colectivas, para compartir semillas, para compartir medicina natural, también para cuidarse, también para curar, para curarse entre ellas y creo que también para implementar un nuevo orden, ¿no? Un orden de libertad, ¿no? ¿Por qué no? Y centrado en las necesidades de la comunidad. Y creo que CAR para mí y para nosotras es esa comunidad de arrochelados que nos permite ser parte de una construcción de un nuevo orden comunitario y de oportunidades para conectarnos. Am, Conectando mucho, ¿no? Con lo que comentaba Suaiba ahora, yo creo que es el momento que vivimos, ¿no? Es claramente una evidencia de lo necesario de estar en comunidad y de la lucha internacionalista. Y creo que no estoy afirmando nada que no sea palpable y visto, ¿no? Creo que sin CAR para nosotras fuera sido mucho más difícil entender lo que estaba pasando en Palestina y para nosotras, ¿no? Las personas que participamos en los capítulos en diferentes lugares y conectarlo, ¿no? Con el Sáhara también, que nosotras lo tenemos aquí al lado. Justo ayer convocábamos una concentración aquí en la ciudad por un Sáhara libre, personas que están, ¿no? Viviendo condiciones de salud muy complejas y ver unidas, ¿no? Con otras comunidades en donde también participa la comunidad palestina de aquí, ¿no? Dando un discurso, hablando sobre las similitudes de los dos contextos, ¿no? Y cómo está operando el racismo allí, pero también en el Sáhara, pero también en Barcelona. Entonces, lo veo definitivamente muy claro, ¿no? Que sin estos espacios no pudiéramos hacer frente a la desinformación, a la islamofobia, entender que también para prepararse para para la represión que localmente estamos enfrentando y de asumir nuestro papel dentro de esta lucha. Creo que esta lucha conjunta desde el minuto cero, ¿no? En el que se mostró la solidaridad con el pueblo palestino, ha sido un ejemplo de lucha conjunta y de valentía entre los capítulos, que además te muestra como los caminos y las maneras de estar en solidaridad, pero sobre todo para reclamar, ¿no? Para hablar de ello, para usar nuestro poder, para nombrar este genocidio, ¿no? Yo también creo que quienes tienen el poder, quienes han tenido el poder de escribir la historia, tienen el poder de hacer creer al mundo lo que quieren, pero es la oralidad y el recuerdo, la memoria, la que nos permite construir nuestra verdadera historia. Por eso creo que es un arma política colectiva, ¿no? El recuerdo en sí mismo, porque las personas lo usamos para sacar nuestra luz a la verdad de la gente. La historia, ¿no? de los libros están escritas por poderes políticos, ¿no? En cambio, las verdades son dichas por las personas que tenemos la capacidad de recordar y la valentía de hablar de cómo lo vivimos, de cómo nos impacta el racismo estructural, de cómo nos impactan estos sistemas de opresión. Y eso, bueno, me lleva a pensar cómo desde CAR Barcelona usamos la oralidad, cómo usamos el recuerdo, ¿no? Cómo usamos nuestras capacidades para hacer frente a una lucha colectiva. Y bueno, y es cuando aparece la solidaridad, ¿no? Definitivamente para nosotras la solidaridad está en la calle, debe salir a la calle, es lo que queremos, porque hemos salido a la calle con nuestro espacio de café migrante, un espacio de antirracismo en comunidad, en donde nos juntamos la comunidad en solidaridad para responder a las necesidades de las personas, como comentaba antes Sam, ¿no? Acceso a la salud, a regularizar su situación para poder acceder a servicios básicos, para poder denunciar y nombrar el racismo, ¿no? Lo importante de nombrar a este sistema y denunciarlo. Por eso, para nosotras, la manera más clara de expresar la solidaridad ha sido la de salir a la calle, salir a marchar, ¿no? Ahora, justo en este contexto, en medio de un genocidio. La solidaridad debe estar definitivamente en la calle, con la realidad, ¿no? Con mi vecino y con mi vecina. Escuchaba un día una frase que decía que hacer política real es el poder, ¿no? Debe recorrer las calles para poder hacer políticas reales y ver qué está pasando allí. Y yo refuerzo esa idea agregando que las calles donde no llegan las políticas de igualdad, donde no llegan las políticas de justicia, llega la solidaridad para reclamar esas políticas de igualdad y de justicia. Y bueno, organizarse para nosotras no ha sido nada fácil. Ya lo sabemos que el sistema también pues hace todo lo posible porque no puedas organizarte ni articularte con otras luchas, que no tengas tiempo, que no tengas acuerdos, ¿no? Porque que no construyas vínculos con las compas de la red, y que no haya confianza, porque hayan divisiones, especialmente quieren que nosotras no quieras enfrentarte a ese yo interior que también debe desaprender y que sigue actuando bajo lógicas de opresión y que no se articula con otras luchas. Y ese es un reto para nosotras en CAR Barcelona. Hay muchas distracciones a nivel local de luchas vestidas de justicia y de descolonialidad que te ponen a prueba, ¿no? Y recuerdo cómo planteamos en una asamblea nuestra, después de nuestro primer espacio de café migrante, una postura sobre cómo debería ser nuestro espacio en la comunidad y cómo enfrentarnos a situaciones inesperadas e incómodas para algunas de las compañeras, o la precariedad o las condiciones de salud mental de la gente que viene al espacio, o los traumas. Y es que ese espacio debe ser seguro para la comunidad, no para teorizar qué es el racismo. Y planteamos que esa era nuestra manera real de poner en práctica el antirracismo, de mostrar a otras personas cómo poner en práctica su antirracismo Y fue una prueba para nosotras determinante, porque si en nuestro espacio en comunidad no íbamos a poder entender y salir de las dinámicas opresivas del sistema, no íbamos a poder estar en comunidad, ni mucho menos luchar contra ese sistema. Entonces, la herramienta que consideramos como fundamental es el diálogo para poder construir una voz pública, y una voz pública de nuestro capítulo ahora es mucho más fuerte, coherente, y CARTE ha permitido eso desde, ¿no? Desde tener una visión global de luchas contra este sistema, pero también luchas contra contradicciones internas y, y ya, como decía al principio, ¿no? Ese racismo estructural que veías inquebrantable, ahora ya lo ves quebrantable, ¿no? Em, y puedes construir tu propio orden, igual que la historia de los arrochelados en Colombia, ¿no? Que antes comentaba. Y creo que es un espacio fundamental para nosotras como parte de un todo que somos, recordarnos que el racismo no puede matar definitivamente nuestros sueños. Am, desde mi perspectiva y mis necesidades particulares también, creo que ha sido un cuidado enorme que CAR ofrezca las posibilidades de justicia lingüística, y nosotras hemos tomado ese ejemplo de CAR y lo hemos llevado a nuestro café migrante, y ahora posibilitamos que personas que hablan diferentes lenguas, desde el Wolof, el árabe, al castellano, catalán, inglés, ¿no? Que todas pongamos nuestras capacidades juntas para poder luchar contra esa estructura, y ha sido un ejemplo para nosotras que en CAR se ofreciera, ¿no? La posibilidad de una justicia lingüística, y nosotras lo traemos a nuestro espacio local. La opresión obviamente no crea barreras todo el rato, y usar los recursos económicos y no económicos para eliminar esas barreras es una apuesta al cuidado y a las garantías y a la participación. Creo que hace mucho la diferencia, y antes no pensábamos en que fuera posible tener estas conversaciones globales a la vez que usamos la lengua para descolonizar el ser y para descolonizar el estar. Ahora tenemos el chip de la traducción simultánea activado, y preguntamos también en otras charlas y en otros espacios fuera de los lugares en donde se habla, ¿no? El castellano, el español, como preguntando posibilidades de traducción para que otras personas también puedan participar. Y yo creo que es un gran ejemplo de cómo CAR permite las posibilidades de cuidado dentro de los espacios, ¿no? Imaginar, nos ayuda a imaginar posibilidades y a imaginar un orden en comunidad, ¿no? Que responde a las necesidades de la comunidad. Si hay alguna pregunta sobre todo esto que cuento, que comento, pues estoy abierta, estamos abiertas a extendernos, pero también me gustaría escuchar a las otras compañeras, así que no sé a quién podría pasarlo, si Anne-Marie, tú podrías pasarle a quien tú consideres.
Yeah, we have Alex from our car Haiti chapter. Thank you, Alex. Thank you so much, Naret.
Merci Anne-Marie. Mwen rele Alexandra. Mwen se yon mam chapit Haiti ya e ma vive Orlando. Pou mwen partisipe nan kominote sa kampay kontra rasis lan, se yon eksperyans ki revelateur liye pou mwen men. Li permet mwen apren yon paket bagay ke mwen pat konen, e li permet chapit Haiti ya, mamb chapit Haiti yo, rive kompren yon paket bagay ke nou pat konen. Rive fè nou fè korelasyon de yon paket bagay ki te egziste deja nan kominote ya, men nou pat kapab mette yon non sou yo. Par exemple, Dans 6 dernières années sa yo, genyen dépigmentation. Michel te mentionné dans commencement session ça. Phénomène dépigmentation li vraiment te en pile dans Haïti. C'est un bagay tout le monde te a constaté, mais nous te ka mette un nom sous te ka di c'est dépigmentation, mais nous pas capable faire corrélation entre lui-même avec racisme. Là, moi-même personnellement, moi rentré dans chapitre ça, moi rentré dans mouvement ça, moi apprendre qui ça qui raciste. Avant ça, moi te connais un petit crasse bagay de ça. Contexte là li évident. Moi ap viv dans un pays qui 95% population noire. Donc, li était vraiment difficile pour capable regarder comment racisme a manifesté dans la communauté parce que en pile monde juste attribuer racisme avec question coulée. Donc, le nous-mêmes nous fin apprendre que dépigmentation c'est une conséquence de racisme intériorisé, nous engager nous pour nous combattre type de comportement ça. Chapitre Haïti en 2019-2020, nous avons organisé 2 campagnes contre dépigmentation. Une façon pour nous te combattre type raciste ça. Li pas facile du tout pour nous te faire corrélation ça, mais à la fin, nous te arrivé faire. Nous te passé dans un pile l'école pour nous te faire séance de sensibilisation parce que nous grandissons dans une société, dans une communauté côté que black yo ba yo comme modèle, moun qui blanche, tout ça nous regarde dans la télévision, c'est moun blanc et en Haïti, ça a gagné yon l'autre connotation. Donc ça permet nous de engager nous dans mouvement ça. Donc résultat que nous gagnons nous pas gain résultat même gens ensemble avec pays Rwanda qui était engagé dans mouvement ça tout qui la caillou gouvernement rivé interdit produit ça yo sous marché ya. Nous pas gagner même résultat ça yo parce que nous pas gagner même contexte gouvernement nous li pas ouais bagay yo même gens et mais nous rivé lever conscience en pile monde sur ça et qu'on y a nous capable dire que pratique ça li vraiment diminuer dans communauté. Ça permet nous comprendre engager dans la communauté là, li permet nous comprendre comment racisme structurel là tout li a manifesté non seulement dans la communauté pam mais dans la communauté internationale là. Ça permet moi gagner une vision qui plus élargie et adapter façon nous agir, façon nous combattre li dans propre communauté pas nous. Yon l'autre aspect qui permet moi sentir nous à l'aise le fait que nous engager nous dans la communauté ça dans campagne contre le racisme là c'est façon nous ouais que gain même chapitre qui a qui gain même struggle ensemble avec nous par exemple dans Carlan gagné chapitre Haïti avec chapitre Palestine qui pratiquement gagné même challenge, même nous gain même lutte. Contexte nous est vraiment différent, mais nous capable dire que nous gain pile similarité. Par exemple, nous gagnons en pile faible opportunité, en pile pauvreté, nous avons subi domination étrangère, bien pile arrestation politique qu'a fait, yo détenu en pile prisonnier de manière inhumaine, qu'une élection injustice qu'a fait, et puis gen pile menace de nouvelles invasions qu'a fait. Donc, point principal là, c'est impérialiste là. Pendant 2 dernières années, ça yo, et Haïti et Palestine, nous souvent retrouver nous sous même longueur d'onde. Haïti n'a récemment sont confronté avec un l'enfer, insécurité aggravée, enlèvement, gang qui contrôlait tout bagaille, frontières là fermées. Récemment, République dominicaine te fermé frontière avec Haïti. Donc yo vend nou an pil manje, an pil bagay nou genyen pour nous survivre dans pays, nous dépend de République Dominicaine. Donc gen an pil côté qui te commencé pas gen manger, pas gen accès à manger, pas gen accès à de l'eau, pas gen accès à électricité. Et dans même période passée ça autour, Palestine vive yon moment pareil, côté que Israël te dit que yo t'a coupé accès manger, accès électricité, etc. Donc, dans le chapitre ça, là, nous rendons compte que nous gagnons même struggle et lutte nous yo même, li ban nous perception côté que nous capable faire solidarité pour nous capable combattre mouvement ça yo. Par exemple, puisque nous, dans la communauté Karlan, nous avons deux chapitres qui gagnent pratiquement même lutte, gagnent deux actions qui entreprennent pour combattre. Donc, la communauté Karlan, l'été fait, l'été organisé dans l'année 2019-2020, suite avec un paquet déportation inhumaine qui t'a fait sur communauté haïtienne nan, communauté Karlan te campé en solidarité ensemble avec nous côté que yo te fait deux séances d'éducation politique, yo te fait yon procès, yo fait un mouvement qui te relé All Eye on Haiti. Mouvement ça yo, c'était de mouvement côté que communauté a montré au solidariser ensemble avec nous pour dire non à violence y a fait sous migrants yo, pour dire non, pour dire camper avec déportation ça. Et même outils ça yo, même mouvement ça yo que Karlan te réalisé pour chapitre Haïti, hein, pendant chapitre Palestine nan, a passé par de moments qui similaires, nous entreprendre même genre de mouvement ça. C'est deux mouvements qui répliqué pour Palestine. Actuellement, Karlan gagne de groupe qui a travaillé pour réaliser des séances d'éducation politique. Jean ça été fait le chapitre Haïti qui était trouvé dans cette situation ça. Donc actuellement c'est même bagay lan k'ap fait et gagné yon procès k'ap organisé tout pour nous capable demander suspendre avec génocide qui a fait là. Donc, ça permet nous resserrer les liens. Ça permet nous identifier communauté qui vivent même lutte et prendre des actions similaires ensemble qui permettent nous goumer contre impérialiste, qui permettent nous goumer contre colonialiste, qui permettent nous goumer ensemble contre racisme structurel là. Yon nan bagay encore qui vraiment révélateur dans campagne contre racisme là pour Haïti, pour chapitre haïtien, c'est notion de solidarité. Pour chapitre haïtien, solidarité li pour nous yon bagay qui permet nous démanteler racisme structurel là. Solidarité a li crucial pour nous. Li permet que nous lutter contre inégalité systémique yo. OK, li Karlan vin pour nous avec solidarité yon espace côté que nous capable parler, nous capable vulnérable, yo capable tendre nous. Gen yon empathie k'ap dégager entre nous. Le comme ça, nous senti nous fait partie de une communauté qui supporte nous. Donc ça vraiment aidé nous rester engagés. Ça permet nous développer quelques outils qui capable élargir conscience nous sur racisme structurel là. Par exemple, ça permet nous rester engagés. C'est engagement dans un mouvement justice, nous permet nous engager dans mouvement justice sociale ça. On l'autre outil que nous utilisons, c'est dialogue, chita, discuter, partager de conversation, partager bagay, façon que nous ouais bagay yo, façon que notre communauté a li ouais bagay yo, ça vraiment aider nous à éveiller conscience nous. Et dernier bagay m'a partagé, derniers outils m'a partagé qui permettent qui éveille conscience nous pour nous capable continuer goumer contre racisme structurel là, c'est un outil qui relève vulnérabilité. Moi apprendre de façon qui est difficile. Et moi apprendre que ou pas qu'à partager ou pas qu'à utiliser outils ça si ou trouve ou nan espace qui pas safe. Comme communauté Carlan, c'est un espace qui safe, li permettre que nous utiliser les outils vulnérabilité ça. Là, nous dans communauté ça, nous senti que nous ka vulnérable pour nous partager comment racisme là li a opéré dans communauté pas non. Le noir c'est vulnérable pour nous partager gens racisme structurel la barre dans communauté pas non. Ça permet que nous gagnons auto-apprentissage. Ça permet de nous apprendre de manière personnelle et ça permet que nous ayons conscience qui toujours été éveillée pour nous capables continuer goumer malgré tout, pour nous continuer goumer parce que nous connaissons, nous fait partie d'une communauté qui est solide, qui pas suspend lutter pour toute inégalité. En passant ensemble avec Anne-Marie, bah kon si gen l'autre membre qui peut parler.
Well, we have 7 minutes left. We have a number of questions in the Q&A, but I wanted to hear if people wanted to speak to each other for 1 minute. Or maybe let me raise the questions that we have. I will read them out all in a line, and then all of our speakers can respond to one point that they have from these questions. So how does CAR go about uniting the distinct local manifestations of structural racism at the global level? Is this kind of is this kind of overarching lexicon on structural racism meaningful to pursue? Okay, we have moved rapidly into more technologically controlled spaces relates to health, where developers and programmers use language to build systems that exclude people of color and leave segments of the population out of the algorithms, omit vital information about people of color, women, individuals that experience a disability, incarcerated individuals, etc. So thinking, I guess, about AI. How will countries mobilize to educate communities, but also disrupt and hold accountable systems that are omitting voices and building systems that are inherently racist and inequitable? Here's another question. Have there been any conferences organized in the Global South? And what challenges have the organizers faced organizing conferences in the Global South? Here's another question. Do you feel that in the public understanding that there is enough of a connection between the right to health or health care or healthiness and racism, decolonization, bodily autonomy, self-determination? Health and well-being is reduced to a medical issue rather than a political, social, cultural, economic, social reproduction question. It becomes a private issue, not a public one. And thanks for translating the questions into the chat for the other folks, because I know I said them in English. I would think that if each of us would just have one thought from those questions or something else that you said, oh, I forgot to say it. If each of us could take no more than 30 seconds, starting with Tinashe, we'll go in the order in which we spoke, but closing with Michelle, if she's still here. I have to see if Michelle is still here. Oh, she's gone. Okay. So Tinashe first. And
Thank you. I think I'll respond to the question on technology and racism. And I think the simple answer that I will say is like understanding structural racism also makes you understand that these systems are not immune to structural racism in itself. Because I know when you talk about equity, people have talked about technology bridging the gap, but we don't realize that how the algorithms and the systems that are in place are still determined or influenced by structural racism, because structural racism, we're looking at the institutions that are involved in the process, the power dynamics, representation, whose voices is there. So you look at this, the people who are benefiting from the privileges that who are benefiting from the unfair advantages are the ones who are still represented in the voices. So I think probably a solution to this is like a wide understanding of structural racism across all systems and a deliberate effort of dismantling the systems.
Then why don't we go to Nared? I changed the order, but I want to go backwards now. So Nared, any question or any comment or anything that you wanted to add?
Realmente no, creo que estoy de acuerdo contigo. Estos sistemas están basados en los mismos sistemas opresivos y no están fuera de ello, lastimosamente. Creo que todavía queda mucho, mucho por explorar. Hay alguna plataforma aquí en España que intenta analizar. Es una plataforma de personas en condición de racialización, gente migrante, que está intentando alertar sobre esta realidad, pero hay pocos espacios participativos para poder expandir esa información a las organizaciones de base, las entidades comunitarias para entenderlo, porque bueno, la tecnología ya de por sí es una barrera para mucha gente y llegar a estos otros niveles todavía sigue siendo una barrera mucho más amplia.
Thank you. Suhaib.
Very briefly, I just wanted to touch on the point around health being a political issue. I think what we're seeing specifically in Gaza right now is individuals, healthcare providers, who are more than capable of providing adequate healthcare with their knowledge base or with adequate resources, but are facing man-made mass casualty after mass casualty. This, I think, dissolves the idea that health practice is purely scientific or about the medicine. I think in this instance, we can see how the political becomes health and how health is inseparable from that. I mean, just try to put yourself in this situation. Imagine famine is everywhere. Starvation is all around you. You're waiting in line with thousands of others for a food aid truck, waiting for food, when suddenly the Israeli military shells an entire crowd of people, killing 10, injuring 15. This happened last week. Those same individuals were then taken to Al-Shifa Hospital. I'm grateful they were able to be transported to the hospital, but imagine how uncertain and unsafe that journey is. A third of the hospitals in Gaza have been destroyed. Ambulances targeted, at least 45 have been destroyed, and hundreds of healthcare workers killed. I think that in this situation, we can see in a microcosm how health and the political is inseparable. I think earlier this week, actually, a 2-month-old baby died of starvation. In 2023 in Gaza, where there was previously ample food, 2024, excuse me, there was ample food. A 2-month-old who eats very little died of starvation. These are purely political disasters. And so just imagine, I guess, the urgency of the situation. We need to see the gravity and the urgency of acting now. I think it doesn't really matter who sees it. We're all seeing it. It matters who has the political courage to do something about it.
Alex, a response to any of the questions or anything that's last minute on your mind? So, Alex, if you don't have anything to say right now, Anne-Marie?
Yeah, I can go very quickly. I'm going to elevate the challenges of CAR that we didn't have time for, that I think answers some of the questions. I think it's really important not to romanticize movements, and so I've appreciated a lot of the discussion around being in struggle, around trying to like get a shared analysis, which goes to like the global to the local. And then the question on the Global South and organising, you know, we had to cancel our global retreat because of the homophobic bill that was passed in Uganda in March last year. And I think that was an important lesson, that like we should never make assumptions around organising and structural racism. We have to always be in struggle about it. I think we made assumptions on values that structural racism, you know, we all saw intersect with other global systems of oppression, other systems of domination like heteropatriarchy, and that wasn't the case across chapters. And we are now in a healing process with Global South healers as a result. Similarly, with the situation in Palestine, for many of us that are struggling against settler colonialism, the analysis and the shared analysis and the next steps in organising were very, very clear, but they weren't for the whole community, right? And the repression was very, very clear. So I think for us, it was just a case of like time to go back to the political education, time to elevate the settler colonialism frameworks, and time to look at the social determinants of settler colonialism. So I think that that's really important, not to end in a negative point, but not to romanticize either movements. We are struggling by being in community every day, and that is the only way that I think you build these types of movements.
And I will close us up by saying that the power of CAR to me is that local chapters are organizing in real work. They're learning from other local chapters. They're meeting once a month by Zoom. That there's the political education across, which is kind of the global to local, but everybody participating. And then there are these threads like anti-Black immigration and the work that's been done around that, or the debt, or so many other cross-cutting threads, political education and a toolkit on political education that the local chapters can use. So it's a very fluid, but always constant learning space. And the one thing that I've learned from this webinar now is that it is so important for each of us to recognize that we are global citizens, that we are not limited to the context, the narrow context of our situations that might try to make us feel powerless. It is at the point when we recognize that each of us is a global citizen and we can connect with other global citizens in different contexts and organize with them and help them and save resources and learn from them, that we understand our real power in our local context and globally. So with that, I will close this. I'm so grateful for this opportunity, Car, for you to share your processes and learning and wisdom with the O'Neill-Lancet Commission on Racism, Structural Discrimination, and Global Health. And I hope that our collective learning continues. Thank you all for participating and tuning into this webinar. Bye-bye.